Well, it's a dirty winter's day here. Perfect day to be doing something with cameras. So what have we got here? It's an Agfa camera. It's an Isolette V. And it's a fairly plain little 6x6 folding camera. Let's open it up, have a look. Hope if I push the right buttons. Okay, so opening up at the front, what do we see here? Well, we can see we have an Agfa f4.5 8.5 centimetre lens. AGC shutter, a Vario in this case. Speeds B 25th, 75th and 200th. So not very exciting range there, but certainly adequate for taking photos. Of course, this is an Agfa. What's the first thing you know about Agfas? Well, the focus scale ring doesn't move. The focus is locked. It is almost certainly cemented up with the dreaded Agfa green grease. So that's going to be a problem, getting that apart. Anyone who's dealt with old Agfas will be familiar with that particular problem. They had some special grease that they used and it has gone bad. Let's quick look over the camera. Well, there's not much to say really. Red window at the back. So the film advance is a simple film advance. It turns the spool and that's all it does. It's not cocking the shutter. It's not forming part of the double exposure prevention. The camera doesn't have one. So this shutter, that's the only sort of working piece we have left. We'll set that to B, cock the shutter, trigger the shutter, it opens, and if I push that back it closes. Something odd going on here with this trigger. It looks to me like it's been soldered at this point, so presumably it broke at that point and someone's put that solder on there. Let's try it at one of the fastest, well, one of the speeds, the 25th of a second. Well, that sounded fairly good actually. So the shutter works. Almost certainly needs servicing. The lens, you know, it's got a bit of a cataract there. It's very dirty on the outside and not very clean on the inside. First task with this camera, I think, will be to remove the lens and shutter assembly from the camera body. Looking in from the back, we see have a retaining ring there, 4 notches in it. It's actually quite well placed because you'll notice that the retaining ring and its notches are well back from the edges of the bellows, which means that I'm not so likely to risk damaging those bellows getting that ring unscrewed. The retaining ring is down below the level of the rear lens group. The rear lens group again is pretty cloudy and cataracty, and in this case the rear lens group is not tight. So either someone has removed this at some stage and then just finger tight it, put it back. The inner surface looks relatively clean. There's certainly a little star of something there, fungus, here and here. This outside surface is really covered in grime. I'll put that lens to one side. Back to our shutter and the retaining ring. Let's just give this little nudge in case it's loose. No, it's not, but it doesn't feel like it's locked solid. I'll go and find the correct tool to to open the back, remove that retaining ring, because there is probably half a dozen different tools you could use to do that job. Okay, well this tool came to hand fairly promptly. It was sitting on the surface where I could see it. This is a simple lens spanner that I think it came from India originally. Now I've got the round points on here, which is not what you'd expect to be using for slots like that, but it does have the advantage that they're less likely to rip the bellows if it slips. So I'll get this on here, set the distance. Tighten the two screws up. Let's see if it'll turn. Yeah, that's turning nicely. Alright, I can put that down. I think I can poke it the rest of the way around with a toothpick probably. Once things are moving, you're better off using something like a toothpick or a piece of bamboo skewer. You're much less likely to cause any damage, because if you've got a metal tool in your hand, there's always a good chance that you'll slip and damage something. Okay, so that ring is off. That's our retaining ring out of the way. Flip the camera back over and we should be able to lift the shutter and lens assembly straight off the front. Okay, we've got a shim here, a paper shim. We can leave that in place. I'll just close that up and put the camera body to one side. And here is our victim for the day. Yes, there's certainly been soldered on here, and it's a bit rusty, which means that whatever flux was used on that solder wasn't neutralised after the event. Our front lens group. Okay. Completely frozen. I'm just going to... Oh, it's moving! It's moving. It's just moving and no more. Alright, we got some movement out of that. Just about took the skin off my fingers doing it, but it's moving. I'm going to put a drop of naphtha on those threads and see if I can move that lens back again, which will carry some of that into the thread. Then try opening it again, unscrewing it. It's certainly moving. Now, if you can get any movement at all out of frozen lenses on Agfas without having to use tools, you have done very well. You should probably buy a lottery ticket. That's just so stiff. Now the stop screws coming round here to the post, this is where it would stop the lens from unscrewing completely. I'm just going to remove that screw so that I can continue using the focus scale ring here to unscrew this lens, because it's got a nice knurled edge which I can get a grip on. So I'll just take that off. That's the little screw that stops that rotating past its close focus position. And see if I can get this lens completely unscrewed. Oh, it's getting there. Now it's freeing up now. Must be near the end of the threads. Here we go. So that will definitely be the dreaded Agfa green grease. I'll get a smear of that grease on a cotton bud and you'll be able to judge the colour for yourself. So a little drop of naphtha on this cotton bud. And there I think you can see it's definitely green. This is an Agfa after all, so we can call that the dreaded Agfa green grease. And yeah, it's green and it's pretty awful. Okay, so we've overcome the first hurdle here, because getting these things apart, getting the lens out, the front group off, is the first hurdle. And what you, in effect, you sometimes get with cameras like this will be a triplet, and the focus adjustment is made by effectively screwing in or screwing out the front element. The middle element is supposed to stay firmly fixed in the camera body. If this is glued into the middle element because the lubricant has turned to concrete, what you sometimes get is that when you break the lens free, you haven't got this turning in the middle group, you have the middle group rotating in the shutter. And if you've got that happening, well, you'll get correct focus at exactly 1 point, and everywhere else on the focus scale it'll be out. Fortunately, that's not what's happening here. I do need to remove this middle group now. It's screwed in. It may or may not be stuck. There's no special reason for grease to be in here, so it shouldn't be glued in with grease. And I want a tool to engage the slot here and here. Well, actually, if I can find my stainless rule, that'll work quite nicely, because it's about that width. So this sort of thing, using a steel rule in the slots, forms a very simple tool to engage with the slots of the screw of the lens and allow you to unscrew it. That one came out moderately easy. Sometimes they don't. If you're faced in a situation where it doesn't look like it's going to come out, what you can do is take your rule and set it down in the jaws of a vise, so you've just got perhaps a millimetre of height showing. Then you can hold your shutter down on that edge, and you've got a good grip on the body of the shutter. You can unscrew it. You've only got to break them loose. After they've broken loose, there's usually no fight at all. They give up. So let's have a look at this shutter. I'll zoom you in a bit. Okay, I've got this comfortably sitting up on a block of wood. Our front retaining ring here, with all the little scallops in it, that's held in with a retaining screw here. Well, actually it's a rivet, but it looks like it's got a screw slot in it, so I'm going to rotate that so that it's disengaged from that retaining ring. And now I can unscrew the retaining ring. Now this sometimes goes smoothly, like this. Here you'll see I'm using a toothpick again. These are particularly crappy toothpicks, so it'll probably break on me. A bamboo skewer can be used. That works very well. But the reason I'm using something other than metal is that it's very easy to slip, and I don't want to scar the front plate of the shutter. So I'll take that retaining ring off. So the front cover shear here can come off. This has got our stop for the lens so that you can't unscrew the lens under normal circumstances. And this is the shutter speed settings cam plate here. We'll move that from the top and we're into the shutter itself. This is a Vario shutter, isn't it? Yeah, Vario. Very much like a Prontor shutter, same family, but simpler. Simpler in a couple of ways. It has a limited range of speeds, and you'll see that there is no self-timer or delay action here. That's where one would fit, had there been one originally. Otherwise, it's pretty much the same shutter. So, the shutter blades actually look quite clean here. They're not at all oily. What's the diaphragm blades like? Well, a little bit of marks on those diaphragm blades with a bit of grease on them, I'd say. They'd certainly benefit from cleaning. So we'll strip the shutter down. But before I do that, I just want to have a quick look at the lenses. So here's my front lens element, and you can see that that's pretty cloudy. Now the innermost surface here actually looks pretty good. The front surface looks awful. Here's the rear element. I shouldn't say group probably, because I think these are just single pieces of glass in each case. There's a lot of grime on that back surface, and it does look like it's on the surface. The inside surface, that's pretty good. Where there's a touch of fungus right here, there's a blob of something in the middle of it. So it's like some particle has settled on the lens there, and the fungus has used as a food source, or certainly taken that as a good place to start set up home. Here there's fungus on this centre element. Again, in the middle of this pattern, see if I can get that at an angle where you can actually see that. I don't think I can. The fungus is right here, and right in the middle of that pattern of fungus is a tiny speck of something, some foreign body. So again, it's likely that that fungus set up home on that foreign body and is thrown out its nasty little tentacles all over the glass surface afterwards. So I think I'll start with this really awful front group, and I'll try cleaning this with some domestic glass cleaner and some cotton buds. So the reason I'm starting with cleaning the lens, which is about the last thing you'd need to do when you're servicing a camera like this, is that I need an indication as to whether this is actually going to be worthwhile doing at all. Because if the lens is completely uncleanable, if that stuff, that haze on the lens will not come off, then the camera's never going to be really usable. And any effort put into servicing the shutter would just be wasted time. So I'm cleaning this now with domestic glass cleaner. And here really I'm just trying to get an indication. There's a lot of filth coming off on that cotton bud as to whether this will ever clean up. Now when you're dealing with something like this, which was very, very filthy, you'll need your cotton bud fairly moist, bordering on wet. Well, with a single element like that, there's no problem that's going to run in and do harm anywhere. And you use a very light touch on the surface, and you're hoping that the glass cleaner will soften and lift off the filth that's on the lens. Almost inevitably you'll reach a stage where there's something left on the glass that won't come off easily. But if you're sure that you have no dust, grit or other contaminants there because you've done a reasonable job of doing your first cleaning, you can push and prod at anything that's stuck to the surface and you would like to see the back of. But first you need to get the vast majority of the stuff off there. So this is actually cleaned up very well. I think you can tell that that glass is now transparent. It would probably serve to create a good focused image on the film. I'm sure the surface won't be perfect. When you're dealing with 60-year-old cameras, you're very, very lucky indeed if you get a lens which is like new. They've usually got a smaller or larger number of faults. Well, that's quite good. I'm going to clean the inside now, which look relatively good. Doesn't look as good as the outside at the moment. And then I can look through it out the window and get an indication of how clear it is. The inner surface here is probably contaminated with oil and grease, and I can see, looking through, that there is a lot of haze on the outside surface, particularly at the edges, which suggests to me that there's dirt or grease or oil around the edge of the glass on that outer surface. So I've certainly got smears on that glass still. That's going to take some cleaning. The outside surface, I'm just peering through the lens now, trying to see where my faults lie. So I've got smears on the inside surface. Now that's oily stuff, and that's almost certainly because of the amount of grease that's been used for the focus adjustment. There is a retaining ring here. It's quite fine. That will be holding this front glass into the mount. If I was to remove that, I can get very energetic and enthusiastic at removing any grease from the metal parts. And the glass lens itself, when it's out of its mount, it's much, much easier to clean. In fact, you can be cleaning that with a soft cotton cloth and quite easily get rid of any of that sort of haze that you get, the oily sheen that you get right in the corners of the lens. I'm just going to check and see if that retaining ring's tight. It probably won't want to move at all. There's no reason for that to have been moved since the day it went in the factory. It could even be locked in with lacquer. Given the fact that this lens mount here is very, very thin in cross-section at this point, if I put any sort of force on that retaining ring at all, I may distort the lens and then it won't screw into the centre group. So it's not worth me chasing that. I'm just going to have to clean that glass the best I can, and it may well be that I use some sort of energetic thinner, like the stuff I normally use is CRC Lectra Clean, which I think is basically a dry cleaning fluid. But that's very, very good at removing oils and grease, and that would certainly help me clean that glass up. But I'm not worried about that at the moment. I can see from the looks of that that'll go back together and give me a workable lens. Now that's the front group. This is the rear group. Now they look much the same when I took it apart, so you can see how well the front group cleaned up. The rear group, let's have a go at cleaning this up. First I'm just trying a bit of naphtha on this, seeing if that does anything to it. It doesn't really make any impression at all. Try some glass cleaner. Now I'm doing the same as I did with the front element. As you use something like this, keep rotating it so you've got a fresh surface in contact with the lens. Here I've picked up a little speck of something. Now had that been a little bit of grease, grit or sand, and you keep rubbing it on the lens, you will create a nice patch of scratches, which would be very undesirable. So that outside surface is cleaned up very well. The inside surface certainly shows those tiny spots of fungus that we saw earlier. I'll give them a poke now and see what happens. Now when you're dealing with fungus like that, often what you're seeing is not the fungus itself. What you're seeing is the damage to the coating that the fungus has created. And of course, damage won't clean off. Fungus might clean off, damage will not clean off. So if you're using glass cleaner or acetone or whatever your chosen poison is, and the fungus won't clean off, it's because you've already got rid of the fungus. All you've got left is the damage that the fungus had done. Right, so I'm looking at this, and with light coming in from the window from this direction, I can manipulate this backwards and forwards, and I can see the reflections on the surface of the glass and on the lower surface of the glass. And so it enables me to pick where patches of haze might be and get some indication of, you know, whether that's going to be a problem. So I can certainly see that the glass is not clean, but it's generally localised little specks of something like dirt or whatever had settled on there. It's not an all over cataract like it was previously. And our centre group here, well, that really shows not much in the way of problems at all. I can see fungus on this surface. That's the rearmost surface of the centre group. I'll just give that a wipe. And this is just preliminary cleaning. This is not the final cleaning of these lenses by any means. It's just to enable me to get a better idea of what I'm dealing with. Now the fungus marks here on that lens, they have left quite definite traces in the coating. Those marks are not coming off. I'm not making any impression on those at all. So that's where the coating has been damaged by the fungus. Now, those are permanent marks, they'll never come off. Short of having the lens repolished and recoated, you're stuck with those marks forever. So is it a serious problem? Probably not. For little wee patches like that, probably nothing. Now fungus, like a lot of small defects to lenses, they can look pretty awful to look at, but they can sometimes make very little impression when you are looking through. And of course it's the light passing through that creates our image on the film. which is just as well. The lens is like this. So I'll put this one aside and get back to looking at this shutter.